Ani, hello everyone. My name is Justine Woods, and I'm the coordinator of Saagajiwe, the creative school's home for action, participation, and research on Indigenous creativity. This presentation is a report on the International Decade of Indigenous Languages that was held at UNESCO's headquarters in Paris, France on December 13th, 2022. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the period between 2022 and 2032 as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The decade's aim is to draw global attention to the preservation, revitalization, and promotion of Indigenous languages, and offers a unique opportunity to collaborate in areas of policy development and stimulate a global dialogue in a true spirit of multi-stakeholder engagement to revitalize Indigenous languages around the world. Over 2,300 people participated in the global launch, including Indigenous language leaders and champions from 125 countries, ministers from 16 UNESCO member states, and representatives from the UN, civil society research organizations, and public and private sector organizations. Because of the work being done at Saagajiwe on Indigenous language, culture, and heritage, Saagajiwe was formally invited by the Canadian Commission of UNESCO to attend the Decade of Indigenous Languages high-level launch alongside other members of the Canadian delegation traveling to Paris, France. The celebration and event included a mix of high-level multi-stakeholder roundtables and thematic roundtables on linguistic diversity for peacebuilding, Indigenous languages for social inclusion, digital solutions for language and cultural accessibility, climate and environmental sustainability, and mobilizing partnerships and international cooperation for Indigenous languages. For this report, I will be focusing on the 3 thematic roundtables. In between the roundtables, cultural performances were shared, such as by the Ngati Ranana London Maori Club, a club founded in 1957 that aims to provide New Zealanders residing in the United Kingdom and others interested in Maori culture an environment to teach, learn, and participate in Maori culture. The first roundtable focused on Indigenous languages for social inclusion, quality education, knowledge creation, and advocacy. The roundtable started off with discussing the importance of solidarity in language revitalization work, and how solidarity is put into tangible action by learning, understanding, and speaking the languages of minority communities. Indigenous ways of knowing and being are grounded in complex interconnectivity and relationality. Our languages offer a better understanding of these complexities rooted in place and enhance our understanding of the world. Within language revitalization spaces, collaborative values promote transnational Indigenous solidarity prompted by the language, resulting in great innovation and change. Indigenous languages are central to the competence of moving forward towards a more inclusive future. Indigenous languages also represent culture, values, and creativity, as well as the past, present, and the future. During the roundtable, Richard Kishtabish, an Algonquin elder and president of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, emphasized how linguistic rights are fundamental human rights and shared, quote, "Language is not everything, but without language, there is nothing." The second thematic roundtable focused on access to information and cultural expression in Indigenous languages using digital solutions. One of the conversations I found particularly interesting during this roundtable was Kevin Chan's discussion on Meta's recognition of Inuktitut as an official language on Facebook in 2022. Mr. Chen discussed how Indigenous peoples use social media differently, especially those living in remote communities that rely heavily on communication infrastructures as a means of bringing people together. Alongside responding to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, specifically calls 13 through 17 on language and culture, Meta's translation of their platform in Inuktitut responds to apparent gaps brought forward by analyzing the use of social media by Indigenous communities. The translation of Facebook in Inuktitut acknowledges the complexity and validity of polysynthetic languages and allows Inuit peoples to communicate and express themselves through social media in a way that reflects their reality and their worldview. Additionally, Mr. Chen shared how instead of crowdsourcing, Meta worked directly with the Peruvic Center in Iqaluit, Nunavut, over a span of 4 years and engaged multiple individual community members to honor the various dialects of the Inuktitut language. This community-based approach honors protocols found within Indigenous research ethics through the inclusion of and consultation with community leaders, elders, and stakeholders to ensure Indigenous experiences and realities are reflected through the language. The third thematic roundtable focused on Indigenous languages, culture, and knowledge for climate action and environmental sustainability. I wanted to start with this quote that Dr. Daniel Hikuroa said during the roundtable. He said, quote, "Indigenous languages are born from the natural world. They are the window into the natural world." This roundtable focused on the relationship between language revitalization and climate change. Many of the panelists shared a collective need for more freedom for Indigenous peoples to assert self-determination and heal our land. For example, the need for grant resources to support local initiatives that focus on the well-being of Indigenous communities, which leads to the well-being of our land. Richard Kitchtabish emphasized that it is the small acts, the small things we can do in our everyday lives and households that will heal our planet. Ethan Jerome, UNESCO's Aotearoa's Youth Leader Chair, discussed the need for our approach to healing the planet to be holistic, an approach that honors how the environment informs us and not the other way around. He also identified the important role that women play in upkeeping Indigenous knowledges, and therefore women need to be a part of the decision-making process when it comes to our languages. Chrissy Grant, a Torres Strait Elder, shared how language is a part of our well-being and the land's well-being. She said that government institutions and organizations need to listen to what Indigenous peoples are saying and what issues are being raised in relation to our current climate crisis. For Indigenous peoples, nature and culture are not separated, and we understand the land to have laws and values that are translated through our language systems. Chrissy Grant also emphasized the need for prior, during, and post-consent when it comes to working with Indigenous knowledge holders. The Global Action Plan for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages identified 10 action items and outcomes by enlarging the functional scope of Indigenous languages usage across sociocultural, economic, environmental, legal, and political domains, applying an interdisciplinary approach that points to the complexity of actions and resources required to ensure that Indigenous languages are preserved, revitalized, and promoted around the world. After reflecting on all of the conversations that were had throughout each of the roundtable discussions, I highlighted some key takeaways that were mutually shared by multiple panelists, elders, and community members. These key takeaways are centering a holistic approach to language revitalization projects and engagements. This means approaching language revitalization's role to the relational well-being of Indigenous identity, culture, traditions, and the well-being of the land. Providing Indigenous communities with the proper autonomy and agency to do this work, as we are the ones who know best how to revitalize our languages. Support is needed from government bodies to implement policies related to Indigenous languages, as well as engagement in co-design and co-dissemination of resources to mobilize Indigenous language revitalization projects. This work also needs to be done through a value-based circular framework, one that centers an ethic of care, working together, sustaining respectful relationships, and allowing Indigenous communities proper guardianship over their culture, language, and the land. Finally, we need to think about the kind of ancestors we all want to be in order to inform the work that we do today. Miigwech, thank you for watching this presentation and listening to this report.